Hi, this is Outlaw Bookseller. This is my first video about The Doors, one of my favourite bands. The first probably of many, because there is an awful lot to say about The Doors, especially in the context of Reading List Rock, the playlist on my channel that looks at the literary and cultural associations of some of the world's great rock and roll songs. And I'm really not sure that this was the first clip I wanted to do, but the opportunity was there because recently published is Robby Krieger's autobiography, Set the Night on Fire, which, as you see, has the same sort of livery as our beloved album LA Woman, and you know, it's sort of iconographic really. You see this, and if you're a Doors fan, you kind of have to have it. And also, he's the only one of the Doors not to write an autobiography, apart from Morrison, of course. So many years ago we had Densmore's autobiography, Ray Manzarek's autobiography, and you know, I guess Robby felt it was the time to sort of come clean and say what he had to say. So I decided to get this, and it's published by White Rabbit, who specialise in rock and roll books. They have some interesting stuff, actually, even done fiction as well. So so it's good to see them sort of getting a real coup with this one. And I have to say, I was kind of trepidatious in a way, because as much as I love the Doors, I've read an awful lot about them. I feel an awful lot has been said. And more often than not, there's too much said about Jim Morrison and his antics and the legend and all the stories we've heard about the band, instead of the music, which is really what's important. But obviously, you know, all of us who are fans of bands, we like to know the details. So how does this measure up? Well, the first thing I would say is that I was uncertain about whether I wanted to read yet another Doors book, and this is probably the last Doors book I read. Of course, like most people, the first one I read was Sugarman and Hopkins, No One Here Gets Out Alive, and that was before I was really heard the Doors, and it is very sensationalistic, and in this, Robby says a lot of it is made up, and this is interesting because Krieger is my second favourite guitar player of all time, and he is the primary influence over my favourite guitar player of all time, who's Hugh Cornwell from the original lineup of the Stranglers. And Cornwell once said to J.J. Burnell, Robby Krieger is the greatest rhythm guitarist in the world, and I'm the second greatest rhythm guitarist in the world. And I'm not entirely sure what Hugh meant by that, because I never think of Robby as a rhythm guitarist. I think of him as an iconoclastic genius who's training in flamenco as well as blues, and he does mention that in here and talk about flamenco, is what separates him from a lot of other guitarists, and it brings him into the classical tradition, and he wasn't afraid to use an acoustic, and you know, and his playing still amazes me now. It's so melodic, well composed, at times chaotic, and of course Robby's the sort of mysterious one in the Doors to me. You know, he always seems sort of you know, stoned. He looked like he was on drugs all the time, and you know, and he was the youngest, and never seemed to have a lot to say, and the others, you know, were all quite volatile. There's quite a lot to say in this book, and in the way that Robby seemed to be sort of rambling along in life, he kind of does this in the book as well. It jumps back and forth in time. It's not a linear narrative, and I think that's a good way of doing it, because most of us know the linear narrative, and so it's quite refreshing that way. And he gives a lot of information to his family. I'm not always so keen on that in rock and roll books. I'm usually more interested in the musician himself, but of course their family molds them. And there's some revelations in there about his later drug use and what have you. Lots of anecdotes about the band, lots of things where he tries to set the record straight. There are considerable clashes within the Doors, it has to be said. Obviously, you know, the most famous and well-known one is the conflict between Densmore's being fed up with Morrison's antics, and you know, which caused him to walk out at least once. There are sort of disagreements between Krieger, Densmore and Manzarek in their autobiographies, you know, in the last 30 years about what happened and what have you. And there's some sort of quite cutting things said by Robby in here about Ray particularly, yet at the same time there's some very loving things as well. And of course they work together in different configurations, so we get to hear all about that. So if you're interested in details of things like the Doors after Morrison, because of course there's the two albums after Morrison which nobody ever talks about, excuse me while I fuss the cat to keep her quiet, and you know, it is interesting, but I do feel it'll probably be the last Doors book I ever read. It was kind of like I wanted to sort of put it to a close, really. So that's out there. Any Doors fan will want it, of course, not just for the livery, which reflects, as I say, the album. And interestingly, behind me on the screen, you can see here, that's the top screen for the original Warner DVD audio of LA Woman, which is a great album. These are really uncommon now. And there is another DVD audio version, which is in the box set, and there's SACDs, and they're all the same mix, 5.1. And if you can ever get hold of a copy, do, because it's fantastic. Because, of course, LA Woman is recorded live in a room with the four of them and you know, extra guitarist and bassist. And, you know, it just sounds amazing in surround. It sounds amazing anyway, but in surround it sounds fantastic. So going back to this, I would say you will want it. It is quite interesting. There's a lot of shocking stuff in here, actually, because you always think of Robby as being quiet and what have you, but he got up to all sorts of shenanigans, and there's some pictures and what have you, and there is a signed edition out there as well. So I can't really say any more than that, because I want you to discover it for yourselves. But as a sort of tribute to and memento of one of my favorite guitarists, who I think is an absolute genius, you know, I just had to get it. I have seen Robby once. I saw him back in the 80s on one of these package tour things. It was called Night of the Guitars, and it was at Bristol Colston Hall, and he was playing with a backing band as one of a number of guest guitarists, and they included Steve Howe from Yes, Leslie West from Mountain, Randy California from Spirit, two guys from Wishbone Ash who were fantastic, Steve Hunter, who played a bit with Alice Cooper and Lou Reed, and they all did a few numbers each. And Robby did Love Me Two Times and I think Roadhouse Blues. And I was screaming like a 13-year-old girl. I mean, you know, shouting, Robby! I think that was the only time my missus has been embarrassed about my behaviour at a rock and roll concert. But it was wonderful, and he was just amazing, you know, and a great, great guitarist. So that's a few brief thoughts on Set the Night on Fire, which is out there now. This is Outlaw Bookseller. There will be a lot more Doors stuff to come shortly. I'm going to be talking in depth about the songs and the literary references and Morrison's cultural relevance, and also about what great musicians they were, and showing you some more things from my Doors collection. So signing out for now.